What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we're talking team events today because just this weekend, one of the largest team events in the world went down, the Frontline Gaming Champions Cup, and it was won by one of the most stacked dream teams that we've ever seen in competitive 40k. For those who don't know, the FLG Champions Cup is a relatively new event, this being its first year running. 8-player team events in the style of the WTC that I spoke about in my video a couple of weeks ago are becoming more and more popular, with both Frontline Gaming releasing their Champions Cup this year, as well as the National Tabletop League offering ranked standings for these large team events for US players. In the past, US has been much more focused on singles events, but with this new resurgence of this 8-player team format, we are seeing a lot of international players travel to the United States to compete, and that's what we saw this week. Now, the Champions Cup is styled as a club competition, where different clubs and organizations will submit 8-player teams. It doesn't have any special requirements to register, just that your organization purchases a ticket. So unlike an event like WTC, there are no restrictions on the number of teams that can compete or where they're from. This has made it one of the largest team events that 40k has seen, with over 400 players competing. The absence of restrictions on what team players can compete for has also made it a place where incredibly strong teams from multiple different countries and multiple different gaming groups can come together to compete together. And that's what we saw with the winning team, which is what we're going to be talking about today. This event was won by none other than the Stat Check team. If you haven't watched or heard of Stat Check before, it is a website that offers up-to-date Warhammer 40k ranking information, but also runs a YouTube channel, coaching service, and incredibly active Discord community. The Stat Check team brought together some of the most skilled Team 40k competitors in the world, with all of these players being some of the most successful players on various WTC teams from countries around the world. Now, as I've talked about in the past with these 8-player team events, they are formulated much differently than you would construct a list or a series of lists for a singles event. Instead of simply being one-on-one competitions, these events are trying to wrangle the pairing process in order to get armies into matchups that they are favorable in. Typically, teams will have a number of defender teams as well as a number of attacker teams. The attacker teams are meant to isolate specific matchup and utterly destroy them. The final placings and determiner for winner of each round is based on a differential of the two teams' scores. So if your attacker list can take their target enemy lists and utterly annihilate them, scoring the maximum differential of at least 50 victory points above their opponent's score, then that gives you the greatest chance to win in that scoring process. At the same time, you have to avoid the other team's attacker teams by using your own defender. These can be armies like Grey Knights and Tyranids that can score incredibly consistently. While they maybe aren't the greatest at winning games by raw score, they can still score a high baseline of points, so you can never lose by too many differential points. And we did see that dynamic in play with the Stat Check team. So let's dive in and start by talking about these defending players. Piotr Zabila Niedźwiecki is a player from the ridiculously successful Polish WTC team and was rocking Adeptus Sororitas for the event. This is a fairly classic Bringers of the Flame detachment. Adeptus Sororitas have one of the greatest track records in the Pariah Nexus season for the fact that they have incredible matchups into a wide variety of targets, which makes them a good defender list. They are not an army that most armies want to play against, so pairing them into armies that are either good at out-skewing the opponent or that are good at hanging back, playing cagey, and just farming points gives you an opportunity to break those defenses. This list included 2 Dialogi, one of them with the Manual of Saint Griselda, a Triumph of Saint Catherine, 2 Immolators, 3 Castigators, 2 Dominion squads to go into those Immolators with their combat squad effect, 3 Exorcists. Now, Exorcists are important because indirect fire tends to be fairly impactful in the pairing process for these team events. There are many armies that can't deal effectively with indirect fire. Armies like, for example, Thousand Suns that have a lot of independent characters running around. Once you are putting Exorcists with Miracle Dice on the table, those armies no longer want to see that, and that allows you to shape the pairing process pretty significantly, especially since many other defending armies are going to be trying to use lots of small units to score consistently. And if you have 3 Exorcists, even if your opponent is playing very cagey, you're still going to get the opportunity to rip those units off the table and prevent them themselves from scoring. Last but certainly not least, we had 2 Seraphim squads, a 5 model and a 10 model, all of them with hand flamers to act as utility, and again be those units that can reach out and touch other utility units. This is a very purpose purpose-built team event list. It lacks a lot of the more rounded selections that we would see in a single-player list. For example, Morvenn Vahl and her Paragon Warsuits for cracking through heavy armor. Instead, we're focusing on the threat and the capacity of those immolators to project Dominion squads up the table, both allowing them to alpha strike the opponent and allowing them to act as utility to score extremely efficiently. We also then had the triple Castigator and triple Exorcist threat to duel it out with enemy armor and also threaten those lighter units that are going to be trying to hide and score points over the course of the game. Typhus ended the event with an incredible 6-0 record, one of the highest on the team. Innes Wilson from the Scottish WTC team came in using Genestealer cults. Genestealer cults actually had an incredible weekend this weekend, and I might talk about some of the other Genestealer cult lists that did well later on over the course of the week, but Innes was rocking an Outlander Claw detachment. This is the bike and vehicle focused detachment from the new GSC Codex. It improves the OC value of your bikes and vehicle units, as well as giving those bike objective secured. It also has a lot of synergy with Achilles Ridge Runners, as well as Goliath trucks with a lot of stratagems like 4+ and vulnerable saves, lethal hits, or even uppy-downy effects, placing them back into strategic reserve to improve the maneuverability of those units. We're using this alongside 2 small units of Adelan Jackals and a ton of vehicles. 5 Achilles Ridge Runners in 3 units, 2 units of 2 and a unit of 1, 3 Goliath Rock Grinders, as well as Goliath trucks. Now, all of those Goliaths were carrying Acolyte hybrids to the table. This included 1 auto pistol unit, as well as the full complement of 6 hand flamer units. Those hand flamer Acolyte hybrids are a huge deal because not only are the trucks going to be relatively high OC because of the detachment ability, they're also disgorging dozens of OC2 hyper lethal infantry. The hand flamer Acolyte hybrids get wound rerolls as long as you are on an objective, so as soon as you move up to try to take the objectives away from those high OC vehicles, they just jump out and torch you. We also then saw 2 units of Neophyte hybrids and a complement of characters, including 1 Reductus Saboteur, another useful utility unit that can threaten enemy advances and infiltrate to perform secondaries, alongside 3 Kellermorphs. The Kellermorphs are another standout unit from the 10th Ed GSC Codex. These guys are able to move every time they shoot, and they can fire reactively when enemies move near them, giving them the opportunity to constantly reposition themselves over the opponent's turn, as well as be dealing passive damage with their devastating wound auto stubs over the course of the turn. These guys can really throw a wrench in the opponent's works, and alongside all of these high OC units and transport effects, it is extremely difficult not to get caught out by this army repositioning itself during your turn as you're destroying those transport vehicles. Innes ended the event with a fairly consistently scored 5-1 record. That moves us on to 2 players from the WTC Team Canada, the first one being Jeremy Atkinson. Jeremy was running Leagues of Votann and had a classic example of a defending army. This included 2 Einhir champions, 2 units of Hearthkin warriors, as well as 4 units of Sagittors in order to combat squad those warriors and embark them alongside 3 units of Chthonian Berserks. We then had a Hecatan land fortress, 1 unit of 5 Einhir Hearthguard, and a ton of Hernkin Pioneers, a total of 15 in 2 units of 6 and a unit of 3, with a unit of Hernkin Jaegers to buy space for them. The Hernkin Jaegers are infiltrators with a reactive move, so they're able to throw a wrench in the opponent's plans, prevent enemies from scouting up the table or infiltrating themselves, and that allows the Hernkin Pioneers to pre-game move along with the Sagittors in the early game. That allows this army to give itself a ridiculous amount of board presence, and especially if it goes first, it is almost impossible for you to score highly against it, because it is simply going to wrap your army with Hernkin Pioneers so that you are not able to move until the game's basically almost over. It's then following that up with that land fortress, this one running an SP heavy conversion beamer alongside the Einhir Hearthguard and the 2 Einhir champions. Oftentimes one of them just embarks into the land fortress and jumps out later on if we're not using them to teleport and rapid ingress onto the table, and those can dominate the center of the table. This creates a list that is incredibly strong to score highly against. Since those Hernkin Pioneers can move so aggressively forward, they can clear out all of your chaff and your utility units and your scoring potential, prevent your army from moving, and rack up points itself. And we saw that in Jeremy's final record. He went 2-1-3. That is 2 wins, 1 loss, and 3 draws. Now, this is the differential scoring system, so a draw means a game where the 2 player scores were within 5 points of each other. Those are scored out of a total of 20 points, with each player being allotted a number based on the difference between them. A 15-point differential being a 20-0, and every 5 points of difference between the player's score, then trading another point between them. So a 45-point difference would be a 19-11. A 10-point difference would be an 8-2, for example. Jeremy's wins were both 11-9, which means that those scores were essentially within 10 points of each other. His only loss was a 9-11, which is just a reversal of that same result. And then his 3 draws were all obviously 10-10. So this list scored ridiculously consistently and essentially allowed Jeremy to sandbag any opponent's attacker teams that they were trying to get big scores out of on their end. This gave the stat check team an incredible tool in an army that could simply sink into any of those super strong opponents and just cancel out their score, basically giving them no bonus for their team, since a 10-10 draw or something similar is essentially a wash for both teams. We saw something similar with Francois Lalonde, also from the WTC Canadian team, rocking Tyranids. This was an invasion fleet playing a hive tyrant with adaptive biology and a neuro tyrant with alien cunning, allowing it to redeploy units before the game begins. We also saw Old One-Eye as well as a Carnifex group for Old One-Eye to join into. That would be 2 Carnifexes with Death Spitters, Spying Banks, and Bioplasma for an immense amount of shooting using Old One-Eye's rerolls. 2 units of Hormigons and a Biovore for utility, alongside a Lictor and a Neurolictor, and 2 individual Pyrovores, giving the list a lot of small individual units with a lot of scoring potential. We then had some big beefy monsters, including 2 Exocrines, a Maleceptor, and 2 Tyrannofexes. Tyranids are another army that are very popular in team events for their capacity to score pretty passively. They aren't quite as good at it in Pariah Nexus as they were in Leviathan, but units like the Biovore still make them fairly good at scoring a baseline of points over the course of the game. Unfortunately, this didn't go so hot for Francois. He ended up with a 1-4-1 record, 4 losses, 1 win, and 1 draw. However, that is just how team events work sometimes. Sometimes you have to take super tough matchups and score as many points as xenomorphically possible. Most of Francois' losses were not huge. He did get 1-20-0 against him, but the rest of his were 14-6s, as well as that 1 draw. This is another list that is trying to jump into those super tough attacker lists and sandbag their score as much as possible. Now, speaking of those attacker lists, what was the stat check team using to get these big scores, to get these big wins? The first was John Lennon from the US WTC team, and obviously also Team Art of War. John was running his Dark Angels that we've watched on this channel with his win at the Crucible Orlando a couple weeks ago. He was running an Apothecary Biologus with Fire Discipline, that guy attaching into a big 6-man Eradicator squad, Azrael, as well as a Judiciar, jumping into an Assault Intercessor squad. We also saw 2 jump back Assault Intercessor squads, as well as 3 units of Deathwing Knights, an Infiltrator squad, a squad of Inner Circle Companions for Azrael to join into, a Repulsor to carry the Eradicators to the fight and get them stuck in on the opponent's biggest and scariest unit in order to kill them basically regardless of their stat profile, thanks to those full rerolls with the Eradicator ability plus Fire Discipline, giving them lethal and sustained hits on 5-ups, a Calidus Assassin, as well as a unit of Voidsmen at arms for scoring. The Judiciar is a new inclusion, but it gives the list a lot of play into opposing melee armies. The Judiciar grants fight first to his unit, and with Assault Intercessors being as dangerous of a unit as they are in melee, this gives the list a melee defender that can sit inside the formation of Deathwing Knights. Oftentimes, you have to crack through Deathwing Knight profiles with super hefty melee profiles of your own. I did talk about this a little while ago in my video about Deathwing Knight, so go watch that if you want to hear my thoughts on how to deal with that unit. But the Judiciar gives an answer to many of their answers, because he's able to heroically intervene through the Deathwing Knights, tie up all of your combat movement, prevent you from piling in or consolidating, and then also fight first and likely just kill you, especially if you're on an objective and the Assault Intercessor's wound rerolls turn on. John ended with a 6-0 record and one of the top individual player scores in the event. Now, John wasn't the actual top for individual scores, coming in at 10th place overall out of those 400 players. Now, John wasn't the actual actual number 1 in the event, because that goes to our next player, Liam Vissel from WTC Team Belgium. Now, we've talked about Liam and his list quite often on this channel, and I've even interviewed him about his Thousand Sons play back in 9th edition, but he is one of the most accomplished team players in the world, and he showcased it here with a number 1 placement, dropping 4 whole differential points over the course of the event. He was running Thousand Sons and scored 4 20-0 wins as well as 2 18-2 wins for a ridiculous total of 116 points out of a possible 120 for the stat check team. Liam was running Ahriman on foot as well as an Exalted Disc Sorcerer, 3 Infernal Masters, 1 with the Umbralific Crystal and 1 with Arcane Vortex, as well as a Standard Sorcerer, the guy who can't be shot outside 18 inches as long as he's joined a unit, with Lord of Forbidden Lore, giving him the opportunity to double cast spells. This guy is a pretty popular choice for Lord of Forbidden Lore because he allows you to play a little bit more aggressively to get his Kabbalistic Rituals in range without having to then use Temporal Surge to bring him back to safety, since most of the time enemies can't shoot him anyway. This is especially good if he's trying to duplicate Doombolt alongside a Mutalith Vortex Beast, because he can extend the range of that Doombolt to 36 inches and probably be outside of range to be retaliated against. Last and certainly not least, we obviously had Magnus Thread because it is Thousand Sons, and that's just how the faction works. Now, interestingly, the list wasn't running a Mutalith Vortex Beast. It was taking a unit of Zangor Enlightened as well as a unit of Thousand Sons Cultists for scoring, and then an absolute horde of Rubric Marines. A total of 6 units of 5. Those guys embarking into 2 Thousand Sons Rhinos. That gives us potential attachments for basically all of the characters, Ahriman, the Infernal Masters, and the Thousand Sons Sorcerer, as well as potentially another unit that can operate independently if we're not attaching the Disc Sorcerer anywhere. This gives us a ton of potential casters for Kabbalistic Rituals and for stratagems like Warp Sight to allow Magnus to fire his big laser beam through walls. Those Rhinos are also very effective at getting them into range to use those abilities, as well as just operating as scoring units themselves. The Rhinos can protect these characters and these Rubric Marine squads from opposing indirect fire. That kind of assuages one of the big weaknesses of the faction in these team events. I mentioned before that a good answer to Thousand Sons is oftentimes indirect fire platforms that can knock out their Rubric Marine squads before they're able to sink into the game, and the Rhinos just shield the most valuable Rubric squads from that incoming fire. This makes the list incredibly consistent as well as very good at knocking out the matchups that are trying to engage it in a straight up fight in the center of the table, since a tide of Rubric Marines with full wound rerolls is just going to kill you. Being an MSU oriented list as well, it is also fairly good at scoring out of baseline, which results in Liam's incredibly high scores. Now, speaking of those high scores, we also saw another US WTC team player come in with a ridiculous record, Anthony Vanella with World Eaters. Unfortunately did drop a game, so did not score quite as highly as Liam Vissel, but did come out with 4 20-0 wins on his record, as well as a 16-4 win, giving him a final record of 5-1 and being one of the team's high scorers. World Eaters are another faction that are incredibly effective in this team format because they are so good in specific matchups. Enemies that are trying to use defensive skews to present a really solid wall of super tough profiles are just going to be smashed aside by World Eaters. And while board control effects and MSU armies that don't really give them anything to chew on can cut World Eaters apart, in the team format you can simply avoid those matchups and put World Eaters into armies that want a straight up fight in the middle that they will almost assuredly win, which then results in huge scores for the team. Anthony's list included a Master of Executions with a Berserker Glaive, Karn the Betrayer, Lord Invocatus, as well as Angron. We had 2 units of Jackals for scoring, another unit of 5 Khorne Berserkers. Oftentimes this attaches in with Karn the Betrayer to turn on his rerolls leadership effect, as well as another unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers for the Master of Executions to join into. That gives the list another potential opportunity to fight against enemy melee armies, because that guy having fight first, similar to the Judiciary we talked about in the Dark Angels list, allows it to counter punch with heroic intervention and prevent enemies from counter-attacking effectively. We then had 3 total units of 8-bound, a unit of 6 Exalted, a unit of 3 Exalted, and a unit of 3 Standard 8-bound. Those Exalted all potentially getting scout moves from Lord Invocatus, with the Standard 8-bound having it built in. We then had a unit of 2 Chaos Spawn for scoring, as well as 2 World Eaters Rhinos in order to embark those units of Khorne Berserkers. Now, last but certainly not least, we also saw Maciej Guzic rocking Chaos Space Marine. Maciej is also from the WTC Team Poland and was running Renegade Raiders. This included 3 Dark Communes, one of them with Mark of the Hound to give his unit Scout, a Master of Executions, as well as Cypher as a lone operative. We then had 2 Cultist mobs for Objective Secure, as well as 3 units of Accursed Cultists to join those Dark communes, 3 Predator Destructors, 2 Chaos Rhinos, and a Nurgling squad. These Accursed Cultist Renegade Raider armies are absolutely classic, and they present a very straightforward defensive skew. If you're not capable of getting through the 63 Accursed Cultists and their attached Dark Communes, you basically have no chance against this list. They're incredibly fast with their once per game advance and charge, +1 to hit and wound, as well as +1 AP from the detachment ability, and following that up by a bunch of Legionaries that can clear out enemy units that can threaten the Accursed Cultists, as well as the Predator Destructors acting as a backline shooting platform. This list is incredibly hard to deal with, and that resulted in Mache scoring a very solid 5-1 record, with mostly big wins on his record, 2 18-2 victories, as well as a 20-0, unfortunately going down in a 3-17 result once during the course of the event. The Frontline Gaming Champions Cup saw some of the most skilled teams from Team 40k travel to compete, including some international teams like Vanguard Tactics, some extremely strong US groups like Dazzler Glory and Xenos Petting Zoo. However, this StatCheck team is a good showcase of what can really happen when you kind of unleash the fury of the international community and create this dream team that is probably the most skilled collection of Team 40k players in the entire world. And it's no wonder that they were able to take down the event. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about these lists for this team, what you think of the team format, and if you would consider playing in an 8-player team event in your future. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.